Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. It had been 6 years since I last visited my hometown. I had left for the city to start a new life with my wife after college, but after a series of unfortunate events, I found myself back in my old house, alone and grieving. As I pulled up to my property, I was stunned to find that my once beautiful garden had been replaced by a large guest house and a sparkling pool. It was like a slap in the face, a betrayal of everything that my wife and I had built together. I immediately knew who was responsible for this. My neighbor, who had always been a bit of an a-hole, had likely taken advantage of my absence and illegally constructed a building on my land. I marched over to his house, my heart pounding with rage, and knocked on his door. To my surprise, he didn't deny anything. In fact, he laughed in my face and told me that he had bought the land from me months ago. I was dumbfounded. How could he have done that without my knowledge or consent? I demanded to see the documents that proved his ownership, but he refused to show them to me. Instead, he called the police and accused me of trespassing on his property. I was taken aback by his audacity, but I knew that I had to fight for what was rightfully mine. Over the next few weeks, I launched a legal battle against my neighbor, gathering evidence of his illegal activities and rallying the support of my community. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to reclaim my land and restore my home to its former glory. Eventually, my hard work paid off. With the help of my lawyer and my neighbors, I was able to prove that my neighbor had forged the documents and illegally built on my property. He was arrested and charged with fraud, trespassing, and destruction of private property. The victory was bittersweet. I was relieved to have my land back, but the damage had already been done. My garden was destroyed and my wife's memory had been desecrated. I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness and loss every time I looked at the guest house that had been built on my land. But I refused to let my neighbor's actions define me or my home. With the help of my community, I began the long and arduous process of restoring my garden to its former glory. I hired a team of landscapers, and together we designed a new garden that honored my wife's memory and reflected my own personality and style. It wasn't easy. It took months of hard work, sweat, and tears to transform the barren land into a thriving oasis. But the end result was worth it. The garden was even more beautiful than before, with colorful flowers, lush trees, and a tranquil pond that reflected the blue sky. The victory was not just mine. It was a victory for justice, for community, and for the power of resilience and determination. My story inspired others in my town to stand up against injustice and fight for their rights. It brought us all closer together and reminded us of the importance of standing up for what we believe in. And then, just when I thought the story was over, there was another twist. One day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from my neighbor, who had just been released from jail. In it, he apologized for what he had done and expressed his remorse for the pain he had caused me and my community. At first, I was skeptical. I had no reason to trust this man who had destroyed my garden and lied to me for years. But as I read his words, I sensed a genuine sense of regret and humility. He went on to explain that he had been going through a rough patch in his life, struggling with addiction and financial hardship. He had made a series of bad decisions and had let his greed and selfishness get the better of him. But he had finally hit rock bottom in jail and had realized the error of his ways. He wanted to make amends and had even gone so far as to hire a team of landscapers to help restore my garden to its former glory. At first, I was hesitant to accept his apology. The wounds he had caused were deep, and I wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. But as I thought about it more, I realized that forgiveness was the only way forward. I arranged a meeting with my neighbor and we sat down to talk. He was contrite and humble, admitting that he had made a terrible mistake and asking for my forgiveness. I could see the pain in his eyes and knew that he was genuinely sorry for what he had done. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I was desperate to find a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager Gary was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said I was big for my race. The list of personal slights was so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. Finally, I had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team whom I didn't know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy and couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane, and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised, considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled the list of Jane's offensive comments and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go, and he did not have authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country, and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for 3 months. There were nights we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and emergency expenses from a health crisis and a funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to 5, 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company I just left. I used to work with this guy closely and texted him a "Congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place." We had a quick call where I told him some ins and outs where I thought they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff. I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new Big Shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently, within the 3 months I was not there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her, how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot and told him she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general. But the evidence he needed was Gary confirming that her whole team has turned over, my prior resignation letter, which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday. It was satisfying to know that justice was served, but I couldn't help but feel for the people who had to endure Jane's behavior for so long. I was grateful for my new job and the opportunity to work with people who respected and appreciated me. It was also a reminder that sometimes we have to go through tough times to reach a better place. I learned to stand up for myself and that sometimes the only way to improve your situation is to make a drastic change. The next one is a petty revenge story. We have a next-door neighbor who does not like us for no apparent reason. This is a vacation home for them, and we have never said a single word to or interacted with them. They seem to think we live in a homeowners associations, which we don't, and call the city code enforcement on us over their perceived shortcomings in our lifestyle. We let our yard grow wild, whereas theirs is meticulously landscaped and professionally tended. We have 6-foot walls between houses, so they can't see much of anything in our yard without trying, such as climbing a ladder to take pictures to send to the city to lodge a complaint. The city investigates, finds nothing wrong, and closes the complaint. The last complaint happened a few months ago when we were doing some legally permitted construction. The neighbor called the city, they came out and found no issues. Apparently, he was upset with this outcome, and he made more complaints, of which only one was valid. He complained about our vehicle parked on the street not having a current registration sticker. Parking enforcement came out and put a sticker on it telling me to fix the problem or move it within 3 days. Apparently, my current license plate sticker had been scraped off. While out front, I noticed my neighbor's new motorhome parked in front of his house. It's illegal in the city to park a motorhome on the street. Normally, I could not care less about it, but this seemed like an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I asked the parking guy, "What about that thing?" He said there was no complaint about it, so I said, "I am complaining." I watched as he took pictures and wrote out the parking ticket tow order. I then watched as, about an hour later, the tow truck eagerly hooked it up and whisked it away to their impound lot. The next one is an entitled people story. I had someone try to take my blue heeler, Sophie, from me when I was out in town with her. Background. At the time of the story, I was 19 and my younger brother was 6. I would take Sophie out with me and pick him up from school. Then we would go to the restaurant next to where my father worked as a pharmacist. When my father was done at work about an hour after we got there, we would all carpool home together. My little brother would take his food to the little arcade machine they had in the back and blow his allowance on it, and I would go outside to eat with Sophie while reading on my tablet. It was a nice little mom-and-pop ice cream parlor/restaurant that had been around since the early 1930s, and it was across the street from a well-known local tourist attraction. We knew the owners, and they liked her, often spoiling her with food that was either turned away or just stuff they couldn't sell that day. The owner's wife would often spoil Sophie with free ice cream or a piece of saltwater taffy. The story: the little brother had a half day on the day this happened, so we got there right as the lunch crowd was leaving. I leashed Sophie to an outdoor table at the restaurant while my little brother and I went inside to order, as per our usual routine. The owners had no problem with it, as we were on good terms at the time and still are. Sophie wasn't aggressive, and I was on a first-name basis with most of the staff who adored her. Most of them were either still in high school or just graduated and picking up a first-time job. I went to place our order, including something for Sophie to eat, and halfway through the order, the server pointed behind me and said in a panicked voice, "Someone's trying to grab Sophie." I dropped what I was doing, turned around, and saw this heavy-set lady trying to corral Sophie around the table, with one hand on her leash, and the other hand trying to grab her collar. I'd had people ask me if she was for sale before. She was and still is a very beautiful dog, even at 16 years old now. But nobody had tried to just take her before this. I rushed toward the door and threw it open so hard it nearly cracked the glass pane. Meanwhile, the cashier was calling the owner out of the back of the kitchen. After I got out the door, I demanded, "What the hell are you messing with my dog for?" The lady responded with a sweet voice, "I was going to take her home." Like she wasn't just trying to steal someone's beloved pet. I lost my crap and screamed at her, "You get your hands away from my dog or there's going to be police involved, and it won't be for you." I was, and still am, a big guy. I'm 6'1" and about 280 pounds. She jerked her hand away like she'd been stung, but decided to try to start ranting at me about how, "You obviously don't care for the poor thing if you're leaving it tied out here in the sun. You don't deserve this sweet little thing." The nerve of this lady. She'd been caught red-handed, and she was still trying to get my dog. At this point, I'd had it. "Lady," I started in a low growl, trying and failing to keep calm. I've had anger management issues since I was small, so this wasn't easy. "She's in a shady area, and I set a bowl of water down for her which she hasn't even touched yet. I'd been in the restaurant for about a minute before you decided to try to abduct her, and we eat outside of this establishment all the time." At this point, I was about ready to explode, but kept as calm as I could as I grabbed Sophie's leash and unclipped it from the table. She immediately hid behind me, and I tried to back off, but this entitled lady wasn't done yet. "You don't deserve such a beautiful dog. I want her for my kids to play with," she demanded. At this, I sensed an opening to de-escalate the situation. "That's a terrible idea," I started, having an idea on how to get out of this situation. "This breed is notorious for being bad with kids." This is true with the breed, but not with Sophie. She's always loved kids, and she's mixed with Australian Shepherd, which are generally great with kids in my experience. But this lady didn't need to know that. "What are you talking about? She's been so friendly every time you're down here." This raised every alarm bell and red flag in my head at the same time. She'd been watching me and Sophie for at least a week or two to know how often I was down here and know our routine. She might have even planned this out in advance. This is a cattle dog. They're bred to work with half-wild cattle and are known as healers for how they bite at heels of people and animals. They're not like Lassie, I started ranting. To be honest, I never knew if she understood that reference. And it doesn't matter anyway. This is my dog, and you're not getting her. Now leave us alone before the police get here. The staff have already called them. This was a bluff. I had no idea what the staff was doing, but it made her stop for a minute, and that was long enough for me to get back to the door and open it before asking the owner who had come out of the back. Hey, owner, not using his real name without permission. Mind if I wait in here with Sophie for a bit? Someone just tried to take her while she was out front. The owner took one look at me and at Sophie trying to hide from the lady and replied, Head into the back. I'll let you know when it's safe. I took Sophie and headed back into the area next to the arcade machine, where she cuddled up to my little brother who she's always been attached to. Meanwhile, I heard the owner start telling the lady off. She even tried to claim I stole her dog. The conversation went like this. Her. He just took my dog. Owner. Nice try, but he's a regular customer and he's had that dog for 2 years now. I've known her since she was a puppy. Her. I'm not leaving until I get that dog. Owner. In the most quiet, soft, and collected voice I'd ever heard him use. It honestly made him more intimidating. I'd never seen him get angry before, and it was terrifying. No, you're leaving right now. We have you on camera trying to take his dog. Her. This isn't over. I want to speak with the owner. Owner. Yes, it is. I'm the owner, and you're banned. Both from my store, for some reason he never called it a restaurant, and all other stores in town. Her. You can't do that. You have no authority. Owner. Yes, I can. I'm head of the local council, and I'm making sure they all see what you did. If you leave now, you should get away before his father gets here. I've already called him, and he's not a nice man when his family is threatened. This was a bluff. He never called my father, but I didn't learn that until years later. Dad was a true papa bear when it came to us kids, even threatening the local deputy once when he came into our house when he wasn't home. This was what finally broke her, but she wasn't going to leave before getting in one last blustering half-threat. Fine, I'll leave, but this isn't the end of this. After which she stormed out. It turned out that was the end of it. The lady got kicked out of all the locally owned stores and had to do all her shopping at a chain store in the next town. She later moved out of the area when people found out what type of person she was and stopped being nice to her. Nowadays, the ice cream shop has been sold to new owners. The old owners retired a few years later and are living a comfortable life on the Washington Peninsula. I still talk with them online every now and then. I gave the wife my reading tablet so she could enjoy her books more often as a retirement present. My father's also retired and spends most of his time around town hanging out and playing with his friends in a blues band. And my brother and I work at a local grocer. Sophie still likes kids and the sweet things in life, but we've had to cut back on how much she gets. She's getting old and having trouble getting around now. If people show interest, I'll try to find one of our photos from when we'd stay out in front of the store eating together. The next one is an entitled parent story. A little backstory. I am 21, and live with my parents as the economy right now is insane and finding a place to live without being unable to still buy food and water is near impossible where I live. Now for the actual story. My mother is the type to feel entitled to anything in the house, and I'm living with her, and despite the items having been bought with my money, it's still under her roof. Back in September of last year, I bought a mini fridge for my bedroom. I buy my own foods and drinks as they're better for my diet than the foods my parents buy. Not to mention, my mother always tells me to pay her back for any food of theirs that I eat, so I just buy my own stuff and get it over with. I hadn't had any issue with anyone trying to take my food or drinks since I got it, so I never thought of precautions. Until a couple weeks ago. I'd bought a small cheesecake from the grocery store as I'd been craving it and I had the money to be able to get it. I also got myself a pack of sodas to have here and there. I'd left home to work and didn't think I'd have any worries. After getting home from a long day, I planned to shower and sit down with my treat and a nice movie. But when I looked in the fridge to grab a water, the cheesecake and 4 sodas were missing. I asked my fiancée if she had eaten or drank any of it, and she said she'd taken herself a long shower and napped all day as her day beforehand had been exhausting to say the least. So I checked the family fridge and what do I find? My missing cheesecake and sodas. I grabbed all of them and placed them back in my fridge before asking around to see who took it. My brother was in school all day and my dad had apparently taken up an extra shift at work, so that left my mother. But when I asked her, she acted offended that I'd accuse her of theft. I decided to leave it alone. It was safely back with me and I planned to share the treat with my fiancé and drink a soda and just leave it behind me. The next day, my mother bursts into my room screaming at me for stealing from her. I had just woken up and wasn't fully registering what was happening. My fiancé, however, was still asleep and the noise woke her up in a panic. I asked what this was all about and she screamed at me about the cheesecake and sodas and how it was expensive to get and how dare I take that away. She was planning to eat it that night with my dad and watch movies with him as it was his first few days off in a week. Instead of being angry, I actually started laughing. This wasn't the first time she'd accused me of stealing from her after she took from me. This did not go over well with Mother, and she screeched again about giving it back. I laughed harder and had to catch my breath. I told her I'd bought them, and we had eaten the cheesecake the night prior and I'm keeping my sodas. She screamed that I better pay her back for the things that I stole from her, and that next time she buys things she's keeping count of exactly how much she has so she knows when I steal again. I then stood up and opened my bag, where I had the receipt from when I bought the items. I shoved it in her face. I told her I'd bought them as a little treat for myself for working so much and that she wasn't getting any of it. And then I had the best idea. I told her I was going to get another cheesecake because I had some cash that could pay for it and she wasn't getting any of that one either. Then I turned to my fiancé and told her to grab my phone and see how much a fridge lock would cost. My mother turned me around forcefully and slapped me for trying to put a lock on my fridge. I'm in her house, and I don't have permission. So I reminded her that her house or not, it was my fridge. I paid for it, and I can lock it if I want. My fiancé told me I could get a fridge lock online for cheap and it'd be delivered in 2 days. So I ordered it right in front of my mother. And then told her since I didn't have to work for a couple days, I'd be keeping an eye on all my things. She stomped out of the room in a fit of rage and screeched to my dad about what a disrespectful daughter I am, and how dare I speak to her this way. I laughed about it pretty much every day since then, and when the lock came in, I put it on my fridge immediately. And everywhere I go, whether I'm going to work or even to the bathroom, the keys go with me, unless my fiancé is staying home, in which case she keeps the keys. Nice try, Mom. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.